Andy, my dude, have you heard of the magical website builder known as Squarespace?
Ugh, not another Squarespace ad. I feel like every podcast is sponsored by them.
Hey, don't knock it till you try it. Yes, okay, it is overhyped, but actually it lives up to the hype. Squarespace is like a website fairy godmother. With a click of a button, your site transforms into a beautiful masterpiece.
A website fairy godmother? That sounds interesting. What makes it so magical?
Well, for starters, those slick templates make anyone look like a professional web designer. Pick one, customize the colors and fonts to match your brand, and voila. Plus, the drag-and-drop fluid engine is so easy, your grandma could build a site on Squarespace.
Well, she did knit me a lovely scarf last Christmas. Maybe website design is next.
Exactly. And when you're ready to sell your Nana's handmade scarves online, Squarespace has built-in e-commerce. Add a store with one click. Get flexible payment options. Then watch those sales roll in. And when she wants to teach others her steezy scarf skills, Squarespace's new courses feature is just the ticket. Nana can set up her curriculum and enrollments and payments in a snap and become the next e-knitting influencer.
Oh, wow, you really sold me with the grandma angle. Sign me up for that free trial.
Just go to thenextreel.com/Squarespace and transform your site into a beautiful Squarespace masterpiece.
Well, thanks, Pete. Even though it's overhyped, Squarespace actually sounds perfect for Nana's site's needs. Appreciate the warning on the ads, though. I'll brace myself next time I listen to a podcast.
Anytime. Let me know if you need any help getting that site up and running. Andy, can you believe we've almost hit 700 episodes of The Next Reel?
I know, it's crazy. And with all the other episodes in our family of podcasts, we are well over 1,200 episodes of movie conversation. It's really pretty amazing that we've gotten to have these in-depth movie chats every week for over a decade now.
And we couldn't have done it without our loyal community of film fans. Their support over the years has meant so much.
For sure. That reminds me, we should give the merch store a shout out. Buying shirts from thenextreel.com/merch is a great way listeners can continue to support the show. Plus, they get to sport our great designs.
Absolutely. I think sometimes folks forget we have a variety of shirts, mugs, phone cases, and more available. In fact, a great place to start is with a shirt sporting the Next Reel's logo.
We also have that classic Fast Times Spicoli Surf School tee, or the weirdly popular Rusty's European Tour shirt.
The one from National Lampoon's European Vacation. Why is that so popular?
Search me, but we have sold a ridiculous number of those. I guess there are a lot of Rustys taking trips to Europe?
We're always adding new designs based on movies we've covered, like our brand new design for a streetcar named Desire, featuring a streetcar named Desire. So if you want to rep your love of TNR and films, head to thenextreel.com/merch.
Every purchase helps us continue to have these weekly in-depth conversations. So visit thenextreel.com/merch today.
And as always, thanks for listening and being a part of the Next Reel community. We've got lots more great movie chats coming your way. I'm Pete Wright.
And I'm Andy Nelson.
Welcome to The Next Reel. When the movie ends,
our conversation begins.
Back to the Future Part 2 is over. You're damn right you made a mistake.
Do you remember the future?
You've got to come back with me.
Where?
Back to the future.
Are we back?
We're back.
What do you mean we're in the future?
October 21st, 2015.
Marty, we're going to be able to see our wedding.
Wow. The future. I gotta check this out, Doc.
Look what happened to your son.
He's a complete wimp.
Don't talk to anyone. You've been looking, Bob.
Hey, look!
Don't touch anything.
I need to borrow your hoverboard.
And try not to look at anything. I didn't invent the time machine to win at gambling.
I can't lose.
I invented the time machine to travel through time.
Hey, Doc, I'm all for that. What's wrong with making a few bucks on the side?
Is that too telling? Andy, was that line that I picked too telling
funny
about how I felt about this movie?
I think it works well.
All right. Well, here we are, Back to the Future Part 2, part of our Back to the Future series, and on the Next Real Film Podcast, which is what you're listening to right now. Thank you for showing up. We're rolling in number 2. As I understand it, they never really intended on making a Part 2 or 3 when they were making Part 1, and yet here we stand with Part 2.
Here we stand with Part 2. This, from my knowledge, was the first time that a filmmaker, a team, was basically given the opportunity to film 2 films back to back, like almost as one, to kind of create a cohesive story, right? And it's the sort of thing that so rarely happens. It happened here, and then I think it was Lord of the Rings that really kind of became the next thing where that took place, and it's not something that studios are really excited about doing, because you're really committing to, I guess, The Matrix 2 and 3, those were filmed back to back, I believe. But it is one of those things where a studio has to feel comfortable about the fact that it's going to be a success. And let's just take, for example, if the Golden Compass team had said, we're going to, make this whole series of films, give us a whole bunch of money to do it, and then the first film came out and it was as bad as it was, they would have, lost a bunch of money, and then they would be, sitting on these films like, well, what do we do? Should we just release them and see if we can make anything back? Or are we out all that extra huge chunk of money? And that's the challenge. And so I don't know, the story about this one, about kind of figuring out what they were going to do with the story in order to properly expand it and turn it into a trilogy, I don't know how well it went. I feel like they had an idea where they wanted it to end, and then we're trying to figure out what can we do in the middle to get us there.
Yeah. How can we make it a trilogy out of a thing that was already over? And so, to the extent that, clearly, the end of the first movie indicates that there is more story to happen, right? So, that's where some of the conflict in my head exists, because some of the stories I'm reading are, we wrote this movie and we thought this was going to be the end of it. But clearly at the time of production, they knew something more was coming. There's a to be continued.
Yes. Right. Which was designed, I don't know, in the scope of what people like Spielberg and Zemeckis and they're kind of the Amblin Entertainment, like that sense of storytelling. When you end a film like Back to the Future with that, it seems like a fun way to kind of do it, where it could have just been left as a fun cliffhanger, which honestly feels very much inspired by exactly the type of storytelling that Spielberg was doing with Lucas when they were doing the Raiders of the Lost Ark stories. And it was very much kind of like that, going back to those old serials. And it almost seemed like ending it that way was kind of giving it this spin of a serial from the old days, where it's will be, or to be continued. It's like, if they ever came back to it, I don't think it necessarily they needed to. The fact that it was a success, I suppose, spurred them on to say, "Yep, let's do it."
Well, it is a strange conceit. We know that the second 2 movies were made back to back. We're starting. It feels like I need to say I'm both watching this movie as part of the trilogy, and also as part 1 of a duology, like of a pair of movies that came after Back to the Future, which I dearly loved. So let's see how it goes.
Well, Back to the Future Part 2 was rated PG at the time of its release for some mild violence and profanity and one frightening and intense scene.
Can't even figure out what that scene would be. What is the most frightening and intense scene? Hanging an elderly man upside down for an extended period of time?
What's funny about like the parents' guide in IMDb is like, they don't always give you the reasons when it's a PG film as to why.
Yeah.
But people can come in and they can put in here, well, this is some violence that happens and it is mild or moderate or, intense or whatever. So somebody put in frightening intense scene, moderate. In one of the scenes taking place during the events of the first movie, we see Biff violently grabbing Lorraine and telling her that she's his girl in his mind, also in the same violent manner. Just before, Lorraine kicks him in the knee and smashes his head with the box that she's carrying and running away, with Biff screaming that he's going to marry her someday, again in his mind.
Okay, well, I'll take it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Andy, right out of the gate, this movie, I can't stop thinking about the controversial recasting decisions around this film. Now, the first one, which I think is going to be a much shorter part of our conversation, is the recasting of Jennifer. That the second and third movie, we get Elisabeth Shue in the role of Jennifer, which means that they had to reshoot the last scene from the first movie and give us Elisabeth Shue in that role, which is essentially a shot-for-shot likeness of the first film. So
shot for shot, but weirdly always feels stagey. No matter what they're doing, it always feels like they're never quite capturing the feel of the end of the first film.
Because the end of the first film comes with momentum, right? It's like you've already had the experience. I think picking it up where they did was tricky, and it's a choice. The fact that that Jennifer was recast, apparently it was because of personal reasons. She had originally intended to be in the other two movies and jumped out of the franchise for personal reasons. I don't know do you know any more about that?
Her mother was diagnosed with cancer, and so she put her whole career on hold so that she could focus on helping take care of her mom.
I certainly would never grudge that, though she is missed, I think, in the second and third movies. And controversially, the controversy is, oh my gosh, they had to go figure out, they had written this part where at the end of the movie she's in the DeLorean. This is Gale and Zemeckis, and now they had to figure out how to reshoot all of that with the new actress, with Elisabeth Shue to give us that consistency. Again, there are always choices, and they were sort of saddled with this one. I have no issues with Elisabeth Shue. I think she's a wonderful performer in her own right.
If this was done by George Lucas, he would have just gone back to the first film and digitally replaced all of Claudia Wells with Elisabeth Shue as well.
Yes. Which actually brings us to our second recasting.
Well, hold on real quick. Before we get to that, I just want to say one of the other weird things in the redoing of the end of the first film as to make it the beginning of this film, there's a weird pause that Doc Brown makes when Marty asks him because they find out that they're married, they find out all this stuff. They say, "What do we become, a-holes or something?" And in the new beginning here, he kind of pauses for a moment before he says, "No, you're fine," which he didn't do in the first film, and it's just, I don't know. It speaks to, again, just kind of the weirdness with the whole thing and the way it plays, where it just is like, why is he doing that? And I guess it's because because of how they've had to, write him as a character, specifically. But I don't know. Again, the whole thing starts off feeling false, and it's frustrating the way that this film begins.
Yeah, false, and I think false in the spirit of the unreliable narrator to me. Like we suddenly can't trust what Doc is doing as the vessel of the one who has been in the future and now knows things that Marty and Jennifer don't know, and we as an audience don't know.
Yeah.
So okay, we get to Crispin Glover, and in this opening sequence, we do have a shot of George McFly standing in the doorway with Lorraine. The old ones. So in that sequence, we have, I think that sequence is reshot or is reusing footage from episode 1, right?
Yeah, because it was the shot of them looking out the door. I think it's exactly the same shot from the first film, yes.
Right. But we have later in the film, we get Crispin Glover replaced with Jeffrey Weissman, and Jeffrey Weissman is wearing all kinds of prosthetics, and he's hung upside down, and he's doing all these things to obscure the fact that Crispin Glover is not in the film. On the surface, how does it hit you that this part was recast?
When I watched the film initially, I don't think I would have realized that he was recast, because the only time you see Weissman as him is when he's upside down. And
right.
it feels very much like, oh, let's come up with something to make it even more obscure for us to not be able to tell exactly what was that he was recast. And to that extent, I guess it worked. What's funny is Weissman actually said that that he was scripted to be hanging upside down to torture Crispin during the shoot as payback for the headaches he caused on the filming of the first movie. Right. I don't know if that's true or not, but
right.
It is kind of...
I think that's pretty funny.
Yeah.
So mixed messages about why Glover is not in this movie. Apparently it started with a salary dispute. He wanted to be paid a lot more. He wanted to be paid a lot more because he didn't, according to him, he didn't agree with the message of the film, said that it was about rewarding financial gain using these time gimmicks rather than love. He wanted love to be the message.
And he said the other cast members were getting more and that he was getting much less than them.
Right. And then he was out, but according to Bob Gale, they made all kinds of efforts to get him in the film, and to the point where, his agents called them and said, Crispin feels he made a mistake. He would like to have this conversation again. Yeah, come on back. Let's have the conversation. But the money was just a non-starter. And so that's when things get a little bit dicey, potentially, depending on your perspective of these things. Gale goes back to Universal, the team goes back to Universal and says, he's not going to be in this. What are we going to do? We're going to obscure his part, but what if we recast him? Can we use old footage? Yes. And can we recast him and make him look as close to Crispin in the film as possible, as close to this other character as possible? His example now, many years later, this was on the 35th anniversary, I think, interview, he compared it to Harry Potter, that when Richard Harris died, they recast Michael Gambon and made him look like Dumbledore as portrayed by Richard Harris. Does that example accurately reflect what is going on here to you?
No, I think the example doesn't work for several reasons. One, it's an actor who died and obviously can't come back to complain about the fact that, how dare you recast someone in my likeness. It's also based on a character from a book. And so it's like you're just filling somebody else to play that character. And so I feel like in no way does it work as a good example.
I don't think so either. And Glover is angry, and he calls it theft. And at the time, when he saw what had happened to that character, the fact that they put Weissman in prosthetics to make him look like Glover, and then he saw the performance and he saw some of the stills, he was angry to the point that he's still very, very angry today with Bob Gale and holds a stiff grudge against Bob Gale. He says it's theft. He says they stole my likeness in order to recreate this character that then is attributed to me because he now attempts to look like me, and that people will see this character not knowing any better and attribute his performance, which is terrible, to me, says Glover, right? That this was, and this then leads to a lawsuit where he sues successfully to the tune of $750,000 that the film and the producers illegally used his likeness to make this movie.
And what is interesting is because of all of this, the Screen Actors Guild actually has new elements in their agreements between actors and producers, saying that producers and actors are not allowed to do this, to reproduce the likeness of other actors, unless there's explicit permission in the contract. It says It has been considered a key case in personality rights for actors with increasing use of improved special effects and digital techniques, in which actors may have agreed to appear in one part of a production, but have their likenesses be used in another without their agreement. And so I think this is largely why now you have these studios coming up with these clauses saying, you're going to be used in this film. And once you do, we're going to own that likeness and everything about it, so we can do whatever we want with it. And I think it's become a tool for big studios like Marvel and Disney to kind of grab onto this and say, once you're in our thing, we own that forever. And, I suppose a lot of actors who are appearing in these big franchises, they don't care as much. And I'm sure that they're getting compensated better than Glover did at the time. But it is certainly a thing to be aware of as to how people can be used now and essentially have their likenesses owned for these things.
So I can see both. I feel like I can see both sides. If I were in Glover's shoes, I think I would be angry. I would be frustrated because we were at a time that was not explicitly set out. And also, I can totally see how both SAG-AFTRA is looking to protect their actors, their performers, and producers and studios from this kind of rift. And then the language in these sort of governing agreements is now very, very clear on what you can and cannot do with likenesses, and has led to a number of initiatives from SAG-AFTRA, all under the banner of Protect My Image, both in right to publicity language and right to use in future creative productions language. So I think that's fascinating that Crispin Glover's role is the one that feels like the first domino to get pushed over, and has led to so much both consternation and litigation and conversation about these issues. This movie, I had not remembered that this movie was central to that discussion.
I don't know if I don't know if I knew it, but something else that I think is interesting that I can't say for sure because I don't see anything about this as proof. But have you ever seen Back to the Future Part 2 or Back to the Future Part 3 sold individually? Or have you only ever seen them sold as part of a trilogy, as part of a set of 3? Because I was wondering, because every time I've looked at it or bought it, it was always like the Back to the Future trilogy. And I was wondering if that was part of this whole thing with Glover, where, and again, it doesn't say, so I'm just completely speculating, but the fact that and maybe you have, I just don't recall ever seeing Back to the Future Part 2 or 3 sold as separate items. It does make me wonder if there was this thing with Glover where they're like, let's just sell it as a trilogy. We'll market it all as, either the trilogy or it's all, the first film, but we're selling it as a trilogy. So they don't have to give him any residuals for it or something.
That's really interesting because, I don't know in terms of physical, but in digital, you can buy it separately. You can buy the separate entry. I'm looking at it in the iTunes store, the Apple TV store right now. And so you can get that movie individually.
So you can't, as a digital copy. Yeah,
as a digital copy. But I don't know how, in terms of, physical media, if it's sold that way.
Yeah,
that's it. That's an interesting theory.
Yeah, who knows?
Okay. Well, that's sort of the setup on getting these things made. And then we get to the movie itself.
Boy, do we.
What'd you think?
This has never been my favorite of the trilogy. It still is fun to watch. There are elements that I enjoy. And what I enjoy the most about it is the ambition that they clearly had in kind of coming up with a way to craft this story that involves the future, a revised version of the present, and the past again. So we're getting a much broader kind of journey of time travel and really the repercussions of time travel. And so I enjoy the scope that Zemeckis and Gale crafted with their story. I just have so many issues with it that, as enjoyable as it can be, I just always cringe as I watch this film because of so many things that I struggle with in the movie.
Are these issues or are they quibbles?
Oh no, they're issues. They're
issues. They're fully bloomed.
Yeah, these quibbles have been watered and taken care of,
matured,
and they've grown into full-fledged issues.
Okay, that's really good to know because I think I told you that I have always loved this movie. Like when I was a kid and I saw it for the first time, I was entranced by it. And watching it again this weekend, I was less than entranced by it. It hit me at just the right time as a teenager, and I saw this movie, and I was just super into the future stuff. And interestingly, on reading it, it seems like the future stuff is the stuff that Zemeckis and Gale were less interested in, but that was the stuff that really intrigued me. And frankly, the first time I saw that hoverboard, that single convention in this movie made me just fall in love with it. I barely remembered anything else about the movie apart from that hoverboard and the park reveal, like that whole park tour sequence that we talked about last week. The homage to Back to the Future 1 with the park reveal was awesome to me. I love it. I love it. I love it when filmmakers just play like this with so little substance behind it. They just had a blast. And then the rest of the movie, we get into sort of the rules of time travel and the almanac and the handling of all these multiple characters, and then we get to have a different conversation. But I want to start with the stuff that jumped out at me in the park first, because that's the love stuff, and then we can talk about everything else. One, that Gale said, we knew we weren't going to have flying cars by the year 2015, but God, we had to have those in our movie. And I love those. I love the flying cars. I love the $39,000 Goldie hover car conversion for old cars. I love the composites. They have these landing ramps for flying cars to come down into the park, and those transitions were super fun. I love Jaws 19. I love the hover or the 3D shark coming out and biting him. I love it's just awful stuff that you must have the hostage special when he goes into the diner and Ron Reagan and the Ayatollah are fighting to take his order. I love all of that. So the entire spectacle of the park just it tickles my brain. I'll stop talking now. What did you think of the park? Is it too much? Is that the thing that blossoms your issues?
Well, when you say the park, you mean when they come down to Hill Valley off of the flying car freeway. Yeah, and they come down to the square, the Universal Town Square.
Yep.
In the future. It's fine. It's funny because as I was watching it, the first thing that I said to my son who watched it with me was like, it looks just like it does in Lego Dimensions. like we had a lot of fun playing the Back to the Future part of that story, flying, with your little hoverboard and everything. They do a good job with it. The future is where I find a lot of issues, and I know they weren't trying to make a realistic, like what would 2015 really look like, and like you said, the whole flying car thing and stuff. It just, they took it down a road in so many ways where it's just like, it's almost too much. I mean, yes, the flying car conversion with Goldie Wilson, that's fine. I like a lot of the nods to things that they did, like kind of more futuristic sorts of things. Jaws 19 is, it's kind of okay. It's never been as exciting as I feel like it could have been, especially because if it's a Jaws movie and that's the shark you're getting, it looks really cheesy. I don't know, just like and I know fashion is one of those things, like fashion is always a strange thing, but they did some things with like the fashion choices and stuff that just ended up being a lot more silly than I think they needed to be. And I guess that's my thing with the future is they decided, we don't want to try predicting what the real future would look like. Let's just go wacky.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's the direction they went. And I think I enjoyed it more in 1989 than I did any time after that. Every time I revisit this film, I'm always like, it always goes down a notch for me because it's just, the wackiness ends up being it's just a little too wacky. And so there are things that I really struggle with as I go through that. But there are elements I like the way that they play with some of the things, like the two little kids, one of which, I don't know if you caught Elijah Wood in his early little role as one of the kids trying to get the video game to work.
Yeah. Using your hands. It's a baby toy.
Well, and that was one of the things that I actually enjoyed. Like when you have that thing and he's trying to show how cool he is, but then these kids are like, oh God, that's so dumb. That was cool. Like when the little girl, when he gives her back her hoverboard, like those callbacks that they did. And she's like, why do I want that when I got this pit bull, and she's got Biff's board. Like there were some fun ways that they were playing with some of the elements from the first film. In this one, it just ended up being too goofy though. And that was my biggest struggle with showing up in Hill Valley before we get to the characters.
Okay. So then let's get to the characters. We have a lot of them, and multiple versions of all of them.
Yeah. Should we start first with? I feel like as we get into the characters in the future, I think the first person we need to deal with is Jennifer, and the handling of Jennifer as we get to the future and through the course of the film, because that is one of my biggest problems with her. Is like let's bring her to the future, but let's just dismiss her because we don't really need her.
Yeah, it felt like when you read Gale talk about how we had to write her into this script and shoehorn her into this adventure we wanted to have because we put her in the car in the last movie. That's exactly what the movie feels like they're doing with her. It's trying to find a way to most efficiently write her out of the story. And that sucks. That sucks. That's like a failure of creativity, first of all, to make her a useful character.
Oh, it was the worst. It's like, let's bring her, but then let's knock her out and dump her in an alley. And because she's a girl and she's having hysterics and, it's just the whole thing was so it was painful to watch then. It was painful to watch now. I do enjoy her when they bring her back to her house and like that whole thing of discovering like the we get to kind of a window in on their lives through her eyes. But then they do the same thing when they go back to 1985 and it's the wrong 1985. They're like, she's just sleeping. We'll just lay her on the porch and she'll be fine. She'll wake up and think the whole thing was a dream. And I know I'm going way too far into the film now, but the way that they write that out with her and Einstein saying the whole thing will ripple across time and everything will be fixed and they'll just wake up right back in their old time. I'm like, no wonder like the people in later time traveling movies say this movie is dumb. Like, well, that's not like that makes no sense. And especially in a film that just talked about all these different timelines. Like, well, now you've got this second timeline. It's like, well, they're going to stay.
What they did was leave her in a crappy timeline is what they did.
I know.
They forked it and screwed her over and the dog.
Yeah.
Especially because they have no sense that where they are is terrible. And this is one of my central problems with the movie, that they are standing in a place which is covered in graffiti and I never noticed those bars on those windows there. Like those kinds of things didn't ring any bells to these characters. They were just tossed off as like sidelines. And I found that so troublesome. There is, and it leads to, I think that's the same sort of mentality in handling these scenes writ large that lead to how ridiculous it is in the final action sequence when Marty is trying to grab the almanac back and has so many instances where he's running around the school or in the car on the hoverboard hanging off the side of the car where Biff is not that dumb. Like, he would have noticed Marty Marty pulls out the walkie-talkie and starts talking to Doc in the back seat of the car, and Biff doesn't notice. Like, what do they expect of us? It's ridiculous. It makes me so mad.
He keeps looking at his radio like, what is this feedback? I'm like,
what's this going on? And he looks over his shoulder. I refuse to believe that Biff's peripheral vision is so bad that he wouldn't see a body lying down in the back seat of the car.
Well, he's under a blanket, Pete. Come on.
So that is the whole, like, that sort of mentality is, it's like the Spielberg thing that we talked about during, Crystal Skull, right? I think we really started talking about this whole idea that what happens outside of camera we don't get to see. Well, this is like somebody told Zemeckis and Gale that rule and didn't actually explain it because it's completely violated every time. Spielberg does these kinds of reveals so much better when he's in the director's chair, I think. And this was just bad. It was just bad. Took me out of the movie every single time.
It's... Yeah, a lot of issues. Okay, well, let's go back to the future, but still, serious time travel issues in this film.
Yeah.
All right.
Yes.
Future. We meet old Biff, and we meet his grandson, Griff and his gang.
Andy, how do brains work with time travel? So, 85 Biff, who is supposedly still washing cars. He's like the one true Biff at this point, right?
The one true Biff.
He's also the Biff who ages to 2015. Now he's really old.
Yes.
Right? And he's the flying DeLorean. I haven't seen one of those in 30 years.
Yeah,
right?
That's
that Biff.
That's another thing that they added that would have been at the end of the first Back to the Future, but they have it here where he comes out to talk to Marty and he actually sees the flying DeLorean. Don't get me started.
Yeah, as if we didn't notice that at the end of the first movie.
But don't get me started on people seeing things like a flying DeLorean and going, huh? What do you think of that?
Yeah.
As opposed to like,
that's weird.
Holy crap!
Holy crap!
Flying car! What's going on? It's anyway. Yes. This is the same Biff.
Because by all rights, it's that Biff who's I'll say he's in the auto industry adjacent, right? He's a car detailer, but he's also an opportunist. And I have to imagine if he really does see the flying DeLorean, then at some point he should be connected to the evolution of flying cars when we get to 2015. Like, shouldn't it be Biff's, conversions? Like, somehow that should be noticed, and it was not noticed, and that's very frustrating.
It is very
one true Biff.
It is very frustrating.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, and then we have Biff and Griff. The problem I have with Biff is that he is given to know things that I don't think he would know. In the first movie, we have a whole sequence where Doc has to teach Marty how to use the DeLorean and what all the gauges and buttons mean and the flux capacitor and turn on the time circuits and enter the dates and all that. But in this movie, old one true Biff, can just steal the time machine and go for a flight through time.
Yeah. Apparently.
And somehow he lands at exactly the right place.
He lands at the exact right place. He knows how to reset all the stuff so that he can go back to exactly the moment that he left from.
And the only reason he is told, or he gives away that he was actually in the car, is because his cane broke at a weird place on the stick. Like, there's no reason his cane should have broken like that. That was ridiculous. If anything, the knob should just pop off. That's what they should have found. But it breaks like the top foot off of the thing. How the hell's that happen? It doesn't happen. And that's the only reason that he noticed that things were... Oh, and the receipt and the bag from the almanac that he stole. And that's the whole convention, that he takes the almanac and he goes back and gives it to younger Biff in 1955 so that younger Biff can start... Yeah, himself... to earlier one true Biff so that he can get real rich. And that creates the fork in the timeline where he becomes Donald Trump.
Yes. Right.
All right.
And he's also playing Griff in the future, which is his grandson. I don't know who he ended up marrying as Biff, but they ended up having a kid named Griff. And again, this goes back to what I was saying about the future and the ridiculous, wacky version of the future they decided to create. I don't know what Zemeckis' direction was to both Tom Wilson and Michael J. Fox about how he wanted them to play other characters in the future that were their younger, their offspring. But Griff is so over the top that I can never, ever buy him, along with his whole group. But it's not just him. Michael J. Fox, when he's playing Marty Jr. and when he's playing Marlene, mostly it's when he's playing Marty Jr. It's like they're so over the top. I'm like, I cannot buy these as real characters. They are like really bad cartoon versions of characters. And it's like, I guess that's what Zemeckis must have been going for the future. It was like trying to turn it into a real life cartoon, because that's the only thing that makes sense with any of these characters the way they are.
Andy, I think you're underselling how bad all of the future characters are, because when Lorraine and George come into the picture, I am equally turned off.
Lorraine Exposition Baines?
Oh my God. So bad. Like, so bad what they did to these characters. And what do you think the direction is, not just for the performers to get through these sequences, but to the makeup artists who, like, It was awful. And poor, the whole character, the treatment of Lorraine across timelines, and the fork with the giant breastplate that she had to wear, like it was just awful.
Just to clarify, this isn't like a breastplate, like armor, like when you're wearing a breastplate. This is a literal breastplate that she was wearing.
Yeah, to make very, very large breasts and low cut dress, which I guess is in character for what they were going for, but I just felt like it was not. It didn't play. None of the makeup work played in this movie. It was really distracting to the performances, which I think were already struggling to get through material that was off for me.
Yeah, they had a hard time with this film. I don't know if it was because they were still sorting out age makeup and the different varieties of age makeup, or the quantity of age makeup, because there were a lot more people that they had to deal with, not just Leah Thompson and Crispin Glover like last time, but they had to sort out. They had to do Leah Thompson in 85. In the alternate future, they had to do her in 2015. They never had to recreate the normal 1985 version of her, because I think we decided they probably just used the footage from the last film.
Yeah.
But still, then they had to do Thomas F. Wilson in a couple different ages, Elisabeth Shue in a couple different ages, Michael J. Fox. Like, everybody changes. I mean, even Charles Fleischer playing the mechanic ends up kind of going through a few things. Biff's gang, we see them in the 80s. They're all aged up. Like, everybody goes through this process. And it just, like, there were so many people that they were doing, like, it just hit a point where I was really struggling with this because they just weren't doing a very good job. And with the budget that they had, you would think that they would have been able to pull something better off out of this.
Yeah, I think so too. Now, I want to say on the flip side of this, there are some things going on in actually capturing these sequences that is really, really cool. And I'm talking about the wonders of the VistaGlide motion control camera system. Did you read up on this?
Well, I knew that this was the film where they really started working on that, and the work that they did to capture the same actor in multiple places, or even just sometimes where the DeLorean goes from a CG flying DeLorean to a DeLorean that's actually in the shot. Like, there were a lot of opportunities for them to do this, use that throughout the film, and it's to great effect.
There were some sequences that were still used. This is very much the Jurassic Park, like, dinosaur issue, right? Where some of the sequences are, animatronics and some are CG. In this case, some of the shots are still traditional blue screen composites, and some of the shots are using this VistaGlide motion control, where they're using the computer control and the camera to actually capture sequences exactly the same multiple times so they can get actors doing the same thing. Shots of Biff and Griff Tannen with Thomas Wilson in the same scene. Shots of anytime with Marty and Martin, McFly Jr., the dinner scene that we're talking about, where Fox is playing all Marty, Martin Jr., and Marlene McFly, all the Jennifer Parker duo scenes, both versions of Biff in 55. It just a lot of Enchantment Under the Sea stuff is done with this tool, because they have Fox on stage, they have him moving through the scene as well. And so it is. There is a lot of work that went in using this, and this movie was a launch pad for a lot of these sort of motion control tools. And I think that is another really cool thing about this movie. That maybe the whole story wasn't that great, but man, the tech behind it to make it work is really, really sweet.
Yeah. I always like the moment where, I think it's when the DeLorean is flying down to land on the street in the new night, or the kind of crappy 1985, and you see it coming down, and there's like a tree or a light pole or something that the camera's passing.
Yes,
and you see it coming down, and it lands, and as we kind of continue moving and past the light pole, we see the DeLorean land, and like on one side of the light pole, it's all the CG, and on the other side, it's all the actual DeLorean, and you see it because it makes it very smooth the way the whole thing works, because you see this DeLorean coming down from the sky, landing on the ground, driving in front of Jennifer's house, and then Doc and Marty get out of it. It's like, wow, that was, it looked like they just got out of a car that was flying. I mean, it's cool the way that worked.
Yeah, I think it's really cool. I do think that using this tool to handle some of the traditional split screen challenges, I think was also really, really neat. And, having the two Thomas Wilsons in the car at the same time in the convertible, I think, there are sequences that are just seamless, that just look fantastic. So I think that the handling of 1955 young Biff, I actually find I like the character a little bit more here because we get more of his relationship screaming at his grandmother,
who's also played by him.
It's like screen doors on a battleship, like all of his little the nuanced little stupid jokes that he has. Like, I found that fun.
I enjoy. Yeah, once we're out of the future, I don't mind the messed up 1985. Like it's fine. It works. I mean, we haven't really talked about the fact that there is this level going through the first and second film of Hill Valley where, like, if you're looking in the background, you're often seeing, like, is that like a porn shop or like what? Like there's always like weird shops that I'm like, that's a strange little thing to throw into the back of like the first Back to the Future, like Hill Valley, like that trashy of a town. But like in this film, when Marty Jr. comes home and he turns on like the 6 TVs on the screen, like one of them is advertising what was it? It's like fake tits. It was, did you see that? It was like,
I do. You're right. It was, I remember that.
Like headlight, you could get like, super inflatable tit, headlight tit. And I'm like, they're just putting this, like, God, like,
yeah.
It I don't know. I feel like there was this mentality with filmmakers in the 80s. We get a lot of this with some of them where it's just like, I don't know. I feel like they were enjoying kind of like this crasser level of what they could put into their stories is just kind of like some filler material that was just there. Like John Landis, we see that in all of his films, it seems. And it just seems like there's something there. It's just like, yeah, they're just like, what are they saying about society or themselves that they're putting this into their kind of the backgrounds of their stories?
Well, I think that leads to a question about alt 1985, which is, we get to this alternate 85 and end up on the doorstep of the principal's house. The school burned down. He's wearing his nightshirt and a bulletproof vest and a shotgun. Like,
it looks like Rambo.
He looks like Rambo. I mean, and we get the whole alt 1985. Like Gale says quite specifically, when we made this movie and wrote this character for Biff in alt 1985, we were thinking about Donald Trump. Like we were absolutely, that was the goal. And this alt 85 is full of guns and biker gangs. And it is like the peak sort of liberal nightmare. And that's what we get. What do you think that they, is the message here? Like, it's crazy.
Well, and it actually is kind of interesting because in the scope of Glover's complaints about the story being all about money and everything, about how Marty just wants money, blah, blah, blah. I think that this is certainly an element showing you that that's not what the message of the film is. Like if you use this just to make it rich and I guess it gets into the wrong hands, but regardless, it's like, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And if you're just making all this money, then it's going to turn into, a much, less savory. You'll turn into a much less savory version of yourself because of the way that you're abusing this. And so, I don't know. It is interesting. And I guess my biggest issue, I think it's a really interesting transition that we get with that time period. My biggest issue with it, going through the whole thing of Doc Brown's ripple theory that he has with time, is when Biff goes back in 2015 and gives that to himself, we should have had a ripple come through in 2015 where 2015 changes.
You're right. This is that is where the central logic to write Jennifer out of the story and their previously discussed time travel rules don't play well together. Inconsistent time travel rules.
Yeah, because you're creating these lines, and it's just like, and then Biff, as soon as he gave himself that other thing, he would have like turned into like, I'm rich, I'm healthy, my back doesn't hurt anymore, whatever it is, and he would know, like, because we keep seeing like They do this to us where they give us, look, I'm holding a newspaper. Doc Brown committed. Doc Brown honored. It just changed in my hands to this new version of my future. Why does Biff not, as soon as he gives this almanac to his younger self, he should have suddenly like, oh, I feel great. I am rich now and I am the king of the world.
Instead, he goes back to this 85. He returns the DeLorean to exactly where and when it was supposed to be.
2015.
And he's now having some sort of a heart attack. Like he's...
Yeah, in 2015, he comes back and he gets out and he's instantly like, like it was too much for my frail body.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Time travel, even though he didn't know how to work the DeLorean. Troublesome stuff here. So
many issues.
The whole idea of returning to this is another one of those sort of repeating riffs, is returning to your home and having the world changed again. The ripple, he goes in and there's an African-American family living in his house.
It's just like he was Robert Downey Jr. in the aughts. Wait a minute, what? Who's in my bed?
That was good. That was a good call. They end up riffing on some technology that has played out. FaceTime, wall-sized TVs. Lots of using your thumb to pay for stuff.
And open doors. You just
open doors.
You just introduced another big issue with the film.
Do tell. What is this issue?
Well, you brought up the whole thing with the kind of the FaceTime, the wall TVs, and all this sort of thing. And that is where, in the future, 2015, Marty Sr., we get this, exposition Lorraine. She does this whole thing about what happened to him and all this drama that he'd gone through that screwed up his whole life because he couldn't handle it when someone called him a chicken. And of course, we get this whole thing here with Needles, and again, terrible makeup on Flea as Needles in the future. And Marty can't handle it when Needles calls him a chicken and agrees to go along with this scheme and gets busted and fired and ruins his life even further. The chicken element of the film, Pete. It was never something in the first film, and it is a huge element of the second film and into the third film.
It actually felt like I was being Mandela'd a little bit. Like I actually wrote in the notes, nobody calls me a chicken. Is this a change in how the first movie did things? Do I need to go back and rewatch the first movie? Because I felt like they were putting such weight on this. How could they possibly put so much weight on this particular element without having it set up? Surely they would have set it up. I'm the one who's in the wrong here. I'm being gaslit.
I know. It makes you feel that way, and shame on Zemeckis and Gale for making us feel that way, for making us go, wait a minute, was this a thing that they were dealing with in the first film? Why is this thing that is so emphasized every time
that it ends up getting in the way? It ends up becoming an impediment to the narrative at the end. Like, because he is such a moth to the chicken flame that he can't avoid it at every turn in the third act. Like he is drawn to address it.
Yeah, because we get it when I guess it first comes up when Needles calls him a chicken and he won't quit his job. Although we get a sense that that's actually what happened back in whatever exposition Lorraine was talking about, the fact that he got into the car accident
because
that
of Joey.
Broke his hand, and that was the whole thing that ruined his whole career, blah, blah, blah. But that was the whole chicken thing too. And then, of course, we also get it later with Biff at the end. And I guess, yes, Biff calls him a chicken in the first film, but never is it highlighted, emphasized, overemphasized the way it is in the second and third films when he gets called a chicken.
But again, that they suddenly in the third film, when it happens, it's kind of weirdly earned from the second film, right? When you talk about these movies being shot as a pair. Although it's been as long since I've seen this third film, so
no, I'm
interested in
the third film.
It's
like he grows past it. I don't know. It's just ridiculous. The whole thing it just feels so scripted. And that is another issue with this film, is how it feels so designed to be setting us up for the third film. Marty's a great sharpshooter. Look at how good he is playing this video game, shooting people in the Old West.
Yeah.
We've got the whole bit with when he's doing when he's watching, or at some point they're watching A Fistful of Dollars. That comes up, and we get the whole setup of the thing that he's wearing. And what was the third? There was another thing that shows up as a nod to, hey, we're setting something up for the Old West.
Oh, Wild Dog Tannen.
Oh, and then it's the history thing. Yeah, when he shows up in 1985 and he's like, oh, Wild Dog Tannen, right? There's a History Channel show detailing Biff's history, and I'm like, oh, geez, like these bits. It was getting to be so force fed to say, by the way, guess where we're going next time?
Yes. Yes. Awful. I didn't care for it. I didn't care for that level. Actually, you know what? Now, I say awful, but I think that's overstating it. I think to my watch of it, I didn't find it actually offensive in any way. It just felt written, and I don't think about it that hard.
Well, that's what I'm saying, is it's not an offense necessarily, but in a film that has these issues, it just, when you have these things that feel written, it just ends up feeling like it's just another issue, because so many of the things in this film feel written. And that's
Yes.
what I find most frustrating about this particular film, is it just feels so written. It feels like we've got to get these pieces, all these different pieces have to get put into the right place so that we can end up getting to where we are. Like the guy at the end of the film, oh, I can't believe you're actually here in the rain in the middle of the night.
Yeah, I know that. Although I have to say that particular nod, I really liked. I really like when they use that over time. And he says, "Hey, we've been waiting for a lot of time. Western Union always delivers its letters." Like, I thought that was funny. I actually am surprised you didn't like that.
But here's the thing: like, if this was one of these things where this guy from 1885. Or I guess it would have been, it was 70 years before. So yeah, 1885. Yeah. If he had sent this letter, Western Union, to deliver in 1955, to this dark corner on this street to somebody standing there by the name of Marty McFly, like the whole thing. Don't you think that and if the whole office had a bet on it, don't you think the whole office would come out? Everybody's going to be there. It's going to be this big thing. They're all going to be there. All right, we're going to see if they actually bought into the fact that this thing was going to really happen. The fact that it was one guy who totally can now come back and say whatever he wants to his team about, yeah, I totally won that bet. No one was there.
Oh, that's the problem that you have with it. I get it.
Yeah, it's the fish. It's the fishing story. They set this whole thing up with a fishing story, and it just turns nonsense.
Well, I enjoyed that. The problem I had with it is that the car was there the whole time. Like, when you look at it, those headlights were not on, but there was a car parked in the distance on every one of those shots of Marty looking at the back end. Why did the guy wait until the flying DeLorean exploded to turn on his headlights and actually say something?
I guess I should announce myself.
Like the instructions were specifically, you're going to watch a flying car explode, and the guy has nothing to say to that. Like, no, nor do the generations of Western Union employees from the 1800s have anything to say with what's a car and why would it be flying?
Yeah.
So I struggle with that part of it, but I do like the idea that there was this letter, because I like it when they're able to use time for narrative beats. Like, I'm going to sit down and write a letter, and eventually it's going to get to you, right? Eventually I'm going to travel through time by way of patience. Like, I know I'll be long dead by the time you get this letter, but when you read it, you will feel like I am still alive because I was just in that flying car, and you're going to be able to do something about it, right? Yeah. Or you're going to feel like you can do it. And that was a good setup for the next movie. Like, I think that was awesome.
I agree. I like the setup. I like all of that sort of stuff. Like, there are elements in it that I really enjoy.
Yeah.
There are just, again, you get these things like this, the Western Union guy showing up, like, and yes, I get it. In context of what we're setting up here, I know I'm arguing far too much, because it is essentially this cartoon movie that we're watching that we set up in 2015. Like, it is this goofy setup. And again, I like the ambition. I like this convoluted story that they came up with to get Marty into this position where he has to get this letter from the past so that he can then go find Doc Brown again. Like, that ending is so perfect. I love the ending of this film when he comes running, like you have Doc Brown celebrating, and then Marty comes running around the corner like he's still here, and he comes running up to Doc, and Doc Pat, like, that whole thing actually works exceptionally well. And so I have a great time looking at what they do there.
And Christopher Lloyd's reactions, his surprise reactions, are always top notch.
Yes,
like
yes.
when to your point, that particular engagement between those two is fantastic. And it's just, again, Michael J. Fox, I think, is just such a wonderful young comic actor here. And I mean, what was he, 25 when he did this, 23, something like that? Like, he just has, so I was, Leah Thompson, I was watching an interview with Leah Thompson, and her comment about him, I think this was more in the context of the first movie when he was doing, Family Ties during the day and this movie at night. Like, how did he do it? How did he do it? And her comment, I thought, was really astute, that as a young man, he was like a coiled spring for comedy. Like, he was so wired. That was the perfect time in his life to deliver these kinds of comic performances. This was his peak. He was so good. And that means it cost him little energy to do great things. And like, he had such stamina. And you can see it in this movie. They put him through crazy stuff, and now putting him through crazy stuff with multiple versions of himself. Great props to Michael J. Fox for his performance here, and Thomas Wilson. I think they do more with Thomas Wilson in this character. Even the over the top Griff, he's doing a lot in this style that, while maybe some of it doesn't hold up for me, it's a little bit too far. It doesn't. No disrespect for the performances that these people were guided to give.
Yeah. Well, and it, Michael J. Fox was 27, 28, so his later 20s when he was doing this. And Back to the Family Ties it ran until 1989. So I don't know exactly the timeline of when they were filming that last season, but it's entirely possible he was still doing that during this.
Yeah, possibly.
And we should also say Zemeckis, who is he's the filmmaker, so probably a little older than Michael J. Fox, but he was essentially doing that same thing during the production of Part 3. He was then editing Part 2, and so he was filming Part 3 wherever they were filming that, and then at night, or as soon as they wrapped, he would hop on a plane, fly to the studio to watch the footage and go through the editing process and fly back. And he said for 3 months, it was like nonstop, just constant work. And I mean, for him, for Michael J. Fox, for these people who are putting so much creative energies into the stories, I mean, it's kudos to them for the fortitude and the passion to really do this, even if there were, issues with the creative in it,
Well, and I mean, we certainly know how that is. Sometimes we have to edit and release more than one podcast on any given day, and it's hard work. Oh, yeah. It's a lot. It's a lot of work.
I fly to Oregon and edit a show.
Yes, I spend a lot of time in a hole in Phoenix. Anyway, all right. Anything else hot on your list to talk about, or should we move on to the part I've been looking forward to the most?
Ooh, I don't know. With that, I think we should move on to the part you're looking forward to the most.
Well, it's your part, so should we do credits?
Oh, yes. Let's do the credits. We'll be right back, everybody. But first, our credits.
The Next Reel is a production of True Story FM. Engineering by Andy Nelson. Music by Midnight Noise, Oriole Novella, and Eli Catlin. Andy usually finds the stats for the awards and numbers at the-numbers.com, boxofficemojo.com, imdb.com, and wikipedia.org. Find the show at truestory.fm. And if your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, please consider doing that for our show. And now, Andy, how'd it do at award season?
considering it's a sequel, considering it's inferior to the first product, it still did okay for itself. 9 wins with 9 other nominations. It was nominated for an Oscar for Best Effects, for visual effects, but lost to The Abyss, which I completely agree with. We've actually talked about all 3 films nominated for Best Visual Effects now that were nominated this year. The Abyss, Back to the Future Part 2, and The Adventures of Baron Munchausen.
Outstanding. Look at us. How thorough we are.
I think they picked the right choice that particular year.
Yeah.
It was nominated at the BAFTAs for Best Special Effects, and it won in that particular case, beating out Batman, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and again, The Adventures of Baron Munchausen. The Abyss was not in there, oddly. Over at the Saturn Awards, we always like talking about the Saturn Awards. Again, it won Best special effects. So it's doing well for itself in the special effects category, which is great to see. In this particular case, they have a lot of nominees. I'm just going to... The other nominees: Ghost, Gremlins 2, The New Batch, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, RoboCop 2, The Abyss, The Adventures of Baron Munchausen, Total Recall, and Tremors. Woo!
Wow.
They had a full lineup that time, so which is pretty interesting. It was nominated for Best Costumes, but lost to Total Recall. Interestingly, I'm not exactly sure how the Saturn Awards scheduling lines up, but Back to the Future Part 3 was also in the mix. And so I don't know if this, because I mean, it came out 6 months later. I don't know if there's a case of like those two canceling each other out, or if just Total Recall's costumes were really considered that much better. But it is an interesting thing. Back to the Future Part 2 was also nominated for Best Makeup, but lost to Dick Tracy, which I think is, that's a great win for Dick Tracy. And so, it did okay. It did okay for itself for the sequel that it is.
How did it do at the box office?
Well, for Zemeckis' Return to the Future and the past and the present and the past and the present, all those different things, he did okay. His budget almost doubled from the first film, $40 million, or $82.8 million in today's dollars. And I'm sure there were some savings in some capacity, I guess, since they did shoot this back-to-back with Part 3. I'm not exactly sure how, since it was like such a drastic shift in the story for the third film, but I'm sure they still found some savings of some sort. This movie opened November 22nd, 1989, where it debuted in the number 2 spot behind Harlem Nights, also in its first week of release. The other new releases during that Thanksgiving week were Steel Magnolias, The Little Mermaid, All Dogs Go to Heaven, and Prancer. Valmont and High Stakes also opened in limited release. Back to the Future Part 2 took the number 1 spot the following weekend and stayed in the top 10 for 10 weeks. It went on to earn $119 million domestically and $213.5 million internationally for a total gross of $688.3 million in today's dollars, making it the third highest grossing film of the year. That lands the movie with an adjusted profit per finished minute of $5.6 million. Not as good as the first movie, but still a handsome return.
Well, that's something. And apparently enough of a something to let them actually... I mean, what would Zaslav do if they were making this movie at Warner Brothers today? The third movie would be axed like after the first 15 minutes is released.
That's right.
So, it's still, even though my Letterboxd review, we're going to, as you will find out, has deflated a bit. It's still a part of a franchise that overall I like. And I think what my experience with it is, it has a lot of earned interest from Back to the Future Part 1. I'm interested in these characters. I'm interested in kind of where they go. In spite of the failings of this movie, what I see as failings of this movie, I so much love Marty McFly and Doc Brown and Biff Griff, all of the Biffs and Griffs.
I don't care for the Griffs, but Biff.
I'm okay with the Griffs, the over the top. I'm okay with the over the top cartooniness of it. It's crazy, but clearly they were intending something, and maybe it wasn't intended for me at this age.
Did you catch? By the way, did you catch Jason Scott Lee as one of his sidekicks? Yeah, I thought that was kind of fun. His
sidekicks are great.
They're all right. It is kind of funny to see Casey Masco and Billy Zane in their
Billy Zane, yeah.
Their age makeup in the alt 85. It's, it is. I mean, I agree with you. It earns a lot of rewatch for me just because I love Marty and Doc Brown so much. I enjoy the characters and I enjoy what they do. There are elements with Marty's character that I feel they really flub as far as the whole thing with the chicken nonsense and some of the stuff that I really struggle with. Like, I mean, to a certain extent, I kind of agree with Crispin Glover. Like, he seems to have lost his interest in this film about being a musician. Like, there's nothing about being a musician in this film at all. It just is kind of completely lost.
Totally.
And he's just on this adventure. But it is a fun watch. I do have issues with it. What really ends up winning me over every time I watch it is once we get to 1955, that's when I feel like things finally kick into high gear and I have a lot of fun with the whole last act of the film as we go through that whole thing again from a different perspective.
I agree with that.
All right, everybody. Well, we will be right back for our ratings, but first, here's the trailer for next week's movie, the finale of the trilogy, Back to the Future Part 3.
From out of the west, in a cloud of dust, a thunder of hooves, and a mighty...
Great Scott.
I know, this is heavy.
This summer, Marty and Doc go back one more time for their greatest adventure of all. Doc's living in the past.
Don't try it, Tenant!
But he's about to be history.
What kind of a future do you call that?
I'm going back to 1885 and I'm bringing you home.
It's the last roundup.
Come on, run!
It's the final showdown,
Hey, lighten up, jerk!
where Marty makes a name for himself.
What's your name, dude?
Eastwood. Clint Eastwood.
What kind of stupid name is that?
Doc meets his mate.
You saved my life.
Emmett Brown at your service.
And Tannen meets his match.
I'll hunt you and shoot you down like a duck.
It's Dog Buford. Shoot him down like a dog.
Michael J. Fox.
Where'd you learn to shoot like that?
7-Eleven.
Christopher Lloyd.
There's a fella that can't hold his liquor.
And Mary Steenburgen.
I never ever met a man like you before.
Gentlemen, excuse me, but my friend and I have to catch a train.
This summer, Steven Spielberg and Robert Zemeckis invite you
Come on, Marty!
to the Rough Rider. Rip-roaring, rootin', tootin', straight shooting,
Just a hold up! It's a science experiment!
rousing conclusion of Back to the Future.
Let the festivities begin!
Back to the Future, Part 3.
We didn't say, Pete, that this movie kind of ends with the trailer for the third film.
Yeah, that's a weird thing. It was a very strange thing, but clearly building some excitement. I could have used a more simple, just leave it at to be continued or to be concluded, whatever it was.
I think, honestly, it was because everybody knew it was such a marketing thing that they filmed these two films back to back that I think it made sense for them to throw something in there just to show what they've been doing.
Well, it was cool, but it was a little bit unsubtle. All right. Letterboxd, Andy, it's time to log our friendly reviews over at the even friendlier letterboxd.com. And if you love Letterboxd the way we do, you can get your own pro or patron membership at Letterboxd with the discount code NEXTREEL, or just visit thenextreel.com/letterboxd and you'll get your 20% off. Removes ads, supports a great team of developers, and our favorite social network for movie lovers. Andy, where'd you land?
I have to give this film a heart because I do enjoy watching the trilogy. And once I put Back to the Future on, I always kind of feel like, well, now I need to watch the other two. This is one of those trilogies where I feel like it is a trilogy and I want to kind of get to the conclusion. That being said, I struggle with so many aspects of this film. It's just, it is such a there are so many things that are hard to get through in the first 2/3 of the film. So I give it 2 stars, but it has a heart.
Oof. Ooh, interesting.
Yeah.
I'm surprised there isn't a sneaky half star in there for you.
No.
I will.
Honestly,
I will
there
tell
was before our conversation, and I dropped it.
Well, when I went back in to review this movie in Letterboxd, or to update my log it in Letterboxd, it was rated 5-star and a heart, and clearly this was back in the day where I was just going through Letterboxd and rating a bunch of movies that I had seen when you first got me to sign up.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And I was just 5-star hearting it because of, I think, the hoverboard and maybe Jaws. And because that was the stuff I was really thinking about. But watching it this time, it very much for me is a 3-star and a heart movie. So it dropped kind of significantly, but I'm with you. It's part of a trilogy, and it's part of a trilogy that's right in the middle and doesn't have to be great. I think you like the third movie much more than my memory of it. I think I'm really interested to see what happens when we talk about the third movie, because I remember very little of it. Very, very little of it.
You may not remember this, but one of our speakeasy guests, when Sarah Trost came on to talk about Terminator 2, she said she had a hard time picking between her two favorite films, Terminator 2 or Back to the Future Part 3.
That's telling. I like Sarah.
It's a really fun film, Pete. I think I'm looking forward to revisiting it because
Flying Train.
I think there will be some fun conversations to be had. And Richard Dysart pops up.
And Richard Dysart. Perfect. All right. Well, I'm looking forward to it. So there you go.
All right. Remember, everybody, you can see what we're working on over at thenextreel.com. You can click on our merch button and you can see what we have for merch. You can join our membership. You can follow our Discord button and join our Discord community, all that good stuff. Check it out. And in the meantime, we would love to know what you think about this movie. Speaking of our Discord community, hop into the Show Talk channel. We will be talking this week about the movie.
When the movie ends,
our conversation begins.
Letterboxd giveth, Andrew.
As Letterboxd always doeth.
All right.
I think you're going to go first and last because you have two.
Oh, okay. Cheater. So we're going to Oreo it. We're going to Oreo it. You're going to be the creamy center.
I'm the creamy center.
All right. So I'm going to start with 4.5 from Leighton Trent. What is Back to the Future Part 2, if not that stabbing, buzzed headache you get when you drink the slushy or milkshake too quickly, embodied in cinematic form? The first time watching this middle part of Robert Zemeckis' trilogy is a dizzying experience of narrative back and forth, lefts and rights, and zigs and zags. But where the first film's seamless transition between setups and payoffs fade away, this one takes over with the sheer hubris of making you feel as though you shouldn't be able to keep up with the screenplay hijinks it heaps upon you at each and every turn. The beauty of this one lies in repeat viewings that provide such ample rewards in the details of what Zemeckis and company are doing in not only telling the second part of their story, but how they are following the first and subtly setting up the final piece of it. This is by far the most comforting headache that has ever come from in the shape of a movie, and I doubt there will ever be another like it, much less a better one. 4.5 stars. Those are some big words.
Wow.
Big words. Big happy headache words from Leighton
Trent. And I guess this is why I still give it a heart. Because yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
right.
that.
Yes, that. I agree with that. I just don't feel maybe quite so strongly about it.
Yeah.
All right. What's your creamy center?
I interestingly also have a 4.5. This is by Shay, and Shay has this to say: jacket dried, Nike mags power lace, board hovered, paradise pleasured, Johnny B good, Marty McFlew, Dr. Emmett browned, future backed. They did that.
Oh my God. Well, this is leaning in on a point that we discussed in the show, which I am deeply gratified to read. Somebody else actually agreed with us. Liam F. gives this movie 4 stars and says, does peripheral vision not exist in this universe or something? Thank you, Liam F. That is exactly my thought. And the answer is no, it does not.
No, it does not. No. 100%.
All right. Thanks, Letterboxd. It is hard to believe we've been having in-depth weekly conversations about movies since 2011.
Oh, you're telling me. Producing this show week after week is so much fun, but it does require a ton of work behind the scenes. If you'd like to help support our efforts, one easy way is by using our Originals page when shopping for books and movies that we've covered.
Your purchases made through our links give us a small commission at no extra cost to you, and allow us to keep having these great discussions.
The Originals page at thenextreel.com/originals links to the source material from all of our adapted film discussions. Purchasing through our links support the show at no extra cost to you.
In Season 12, the focus was big franchises and series. We covered both Paddington films, adapted from the beloved children's book character created by Michael Bond.
Oh, I love those films so much.
Hugh Grant is perfect.
For our Pitch Perfect series, the first film was adapted from Mickey Rapkin's nonfiction book about collegiate a cappella competitions.
It's like a short story of my life, literally. I lived college a cappella.
Sing it, brother.
I lived college a cappella.
I didn't mean literally.
You know who you're talking to, right? The Twilight Saga dominated the season with 5 films adapted from Stephenie Meyer's vampire romance novels, Twilight, New Moon, Eclipse, and the 2 Breaking Dawn parts.
Dominated with awkward romance and nonsense logic is more like it.
That too.
Another Thin Man brought us back to Dashiell Hammett's only Thin Man sequel based on other Hammett material, The Farewell Murder, that wasn't just based on the characters from the first film.
We talked about Trainspotting and its sequel, T2 Trainspotting, adapted from Irvine Welsh's novels.
I hate the sequel's name.
I do too.
And the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy adapted from J.R.R. Tolkien's epic fantasy series.
Love these.
Extended editions all the way, baby.
Plus, all the Mission Impossible films based on the 1960s TV series.
And we've still got at least one more to go.
Members got to hear us chat about The Hustler and The Color of Money, adapted from Walter Tevis's books.
Get all of these books and more at our Originals page, thenextreel.com/originals.
Start your next read from the movies we've covered at thenextreel.com/originals.